Hello, everyone. Welcome back to StarSound Speaks. This is your host, Irliana Samsara of StarSound Astrology, and we're so delighted to have back Erin Reese. Hello, Erin.
Hello, Irliana. It's lovely to be here.
You look gorgeous, radiant.
Oh, so do you.
Oh.
I love your hair.
Oh, thanks. Somebody just called me. It was I have to acknowledge them. They said it's a punk. I was upset that my hair was a little too choppy, like I looked like Buster Brown, but somebody goes, no, it's like a punk Julie Andrews. I'm like, all right, I'll take it.
You can't get much better than that.
You can't. Anyway, so, many people are new to this channel and they haven't met you yet. So I just want to say, by way of introduction, today, Erin and I are going to talk about Saturn's just 4 days ago station direct at 0 Pisces. This is monumentally huge. The reason why I really wanted, of all the people to ask to come on and talk about this, Erin is incredibly well versed in these matters because, well, first of all, she is an astrologer and a mystic. She stopped counting how many times she's been to India, spent literally years there, amalgamated. And she is a teacher of non-duality, the non-duality teachings. So, and the author of Bindi Girl, Part 1, Part 2, and there's another one. I'll put the links below so you can check them out. They're wonderful books. I feel like I'm there in India. But this one called Truth Seeker, A Spiritual Adventure of Love, Loss, and Liberation, is definitely the one that we're, I'm sure we'll reference that a few times today. But anyway, just to give you that. Also, she is an incredible writer, and she's got her own podcast, and you can check that out. And again, all this info below, erinreese.substack.com. And so yes, so if there's something here that really resonates with you, guess what? You can delve more deeply with Erin. She does monthly Zoom calls, and erinreese.com is her website. So definitely check that out. And her email, might as well say that too. I'll mention this probably at the end, but in case I don't, satsang@erinreese.com. So with that being said, yeah, let's dive in. Framing this, Erin, yeah, so Saturn is in the sign of Pisces. It just spent several months retrograding from June till November 4th. It went back to this 0 degree. So certainly Saturn, anytime, Saturn does its it governs an age, it governs the reality structure of who and what we are. But the fact that it's stationed direct at 0, that I always think of 0 degrees is like the acorn. The mighty oak is in the acorn, and it contains the full potentiality. So the fact that it's now going direct at 0, like, wow, what an outrageous time this is. It can be very discomforting too when you see complete dissolution of reality. Can be scary, but there's a grace there too. I know, it's just an understatement, right? I mean,
well, now you're really talking my language.
yeah, this is non-duality.
The dissolution of reality. Yes. Say more about the acorn and the 0 degrees. I think you've also mentioned in the past, whenever we have 0 degrees or 0 to 1 degrees and the 29th to 30th degree, those are the degrees that really pack the entire spectrum, the whole punch of a sign, right?
Yes, exactly. All that, it's like I think of 29 degrees as being like the rose has completely blossomed and it's full. It's at its fullest, most, complete fullness. And then the acorn, or the bud, I like to think of the acorn because there's so much growth in that little acorn. You get this 100-foot tall oak tree, and Saturn and 0 Pisces is like, well, what's available to us in this? And another thing, I will shut up after this, just so folks have a little frame here. The February, this is a big, deep convo because Saturn is going to go back and forth. We just checked our dates before starting this recording. I thought it was going to finish in May of 2025, but actually it's more than that. it'll stop, it'll go into Aries and it'll retrograde back to 25 Pisces during 2025, and it won't be fully into Aries until February, think Valentine's Day 2026. It'll be the day before, February 13th, 2026. So what the conversations and the things that are available to us now are huge and are going to be shaped. We're going to be seeing this playing out over the next, year and a half, 2 years. Like this is huge. This is really, really important. So paying attention, diving off this cliff. I want to dive into this. Here's Saturn on zero. Okay, here's one more metaphor. It's like if somebody's standing over a swimming pool, it is Pisces after all, swimming pool, standing on that diving board, and it's kind of like bouncing, 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 like, okay, what's going to happen here? You could jump and do a triple flip, I don't know, jackknife, whatever they call those things, and boom, into the pool. We have such choice here.
Choice. Yes. That's an interesting topic. Choice. The choice to choose to come into a deeper understanding of what is available here. And you and I talked recently about Saturn sort of being the messenger planet between the outer planets, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, and then sort of bridging the gap into the personal. So the interesting thing about Saturn and Pisces is that here we are working with Pisces. Think about the 12th house. Think about all that Pisces represents. It's the cosmic soup.
The cosmos.
And so Saturn is typically known for where we need to roll up our sleeves and do the work. And I'm a huge fan of Saturn. I love Saturn. A lot of people feel uneasy with Saturn, like, uh-oh, it's the karmic taskmaster. Here I have to do this extra work. But as an astrologer for 30 plus years, I always go straight to where Saturn is transiting in a chart to see. For usually 2.5 years or so, this is where the person can be directed on the earthly plane to roll up their sleeves. And I think it's great that we have this tool of astrology, because you get a head start. You're not over here doing your window washing and then the dirt is over on this side. You actually know where the window needs to be washed. So for the collective, for all of us here on planet Earth, Saturn is saying, all right, how y'all doing with your understanding of all things Piscean and this cosmic soup? And when I say the cosmic soup, what do I mean? Think of 12th house. Think of Pisces being the sign of self-undoing, but that's sort of a negativity. Pisces to me is oneness. That's the non-dual. Think about the fish in the glyph of Pisces swimming in 2 different directions, but joined. They are in union. And so when I say non-dual, there is a Sanskrit word that encompasses what I mean by non-duality. And that Sanskrit word is Advaita. 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 Means not, and Dvait means two. So it means not two. Or we could even look at more of the imbued terminology of what Advaita means. And it really means one without a second. One without a second. So even before something is identified as a second, as an other, there we are in Pisces in this wholeness. So that's where we're starting. So Saturn is saying, okay, for those who are called on a spiritual level, this is your opportunity to have this deeper understanding.
Right. And also
embodied understanding. Saturn is grounding this for us. Go ahead, Ileana.
I was going to say, we also, it's kind of a little do-over, because back in March of 2023, earlier this year, it entered 0, and then it progressed to about, I think it was 5 degrees in June, and stopped and went retrograde. So we're kind of getting this, it gave us a preview of, so if we go back in our lives to March and see about what was going on there in our lives, now there's this chance to revisit. So maybe the things that came up for us in March can also, of course, it was a very big month because Pluto also went into Aquarius, and we can't step over that. But the fact that Pluto being in Saturn's temple of Aquarius, it was a very Saturnian month, but we are definitely getting to hit that reset button, or maybe, we've had a few months to think about what does that look like, and what kind of track do we want to lay in terms of transcendental thinking and experiences, and the non-duality. I want to say the non-duality reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one way to look at it, because non-duality is the spiritual understanding, sort of the scaffolding of the greater self, of the ground of being is what I would call it, the self with the capital S. Okay, that which is never not here. We have to use a double negative in that sense, because it's not the absence of something, it's not the presence of something. It's actually the absence of presence. It's always here.
The absence of presence. Woof, that's a deep one.
Yes, you might want to press pause for those who are listening and contemplate that.
Yeah,
something,
right.
something that does not come and go. So that's sort of the conceptualization of non-duality the best that we can, because we actually would never be able to explain with words what non-duality is. It's like the Buddha said, it's the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon.
Not the
It's
moon.
only a pointer. So this is the absence of presence, or that which does not come and go. And that is the scaffolding, the ground of being. Okay, well, that's great. But what does that mean in daily life? Well, daily life, as you were just mentioning about reality, is lived in duality. That's the paradox. But my focus and my interest in my work is the non-dual, because that is the part that is often missed. We are fixated on duality. We think that that's all that there is, or that I have some control over it. When really this offering of this greater understanding, and this, what I would say, the dissolving, you started out our talk today with talking about dissolving. And I said, that's my interest right there. The dissolving of the identification with the separate self.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is the dissolving of the identification with the egoic me, not meaning that you're going to be a vegetable, but that you're no longer fixated on that part. There's still the functioning, but also the identification with what we perceive. And when I say perceive, I mean, what are we reading? What are we listening to? What are we hearing? Who is this other that is in my story, in my personal story? Is there an identification with that, a fixation, a grasping, or is there an allowing? And allowing is one of my greatest favorite terminologies for the word love. Allowing, acceptance, and one that I just heard the other day, agreeing to what is unfolding. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah. Agree. Like, yeah, that there's nothing to fix or change, or, well, how about that Piscean savior martyr? I gotta save people, and I've got to fix this. And yeah.
Wow, that's a big one too. So here we are with Saturn in this time around, and I'm not sure, maybe you remember the last time we had this particular configuration. Also the fact that Saturn is going to be conjoining Neptune, coming up. That's not happened for quite some time. So it's
Yeah.
very, yeah. And if we look at the evolution of our planet as sort of a flower opening up, of an opening of consciousness over time, we've never been in this particular moment of Saturn and Pisces in the same way. And so he is coming and saying, okay, here, let's go a little bit deeper in our understanding. That's the opportunity that we have. And you brought up martyrdom. And Pisces is often associated with, the sign of the fish and the Christ consciousness. And what does that mean? What is the real meaning of sacrifice here? And what does that mean in terms of expanding our consciousness to a greater understanding of moving beyond victim consciousness, victim and perpetrator? Because as we know, who is the victim and who is the perpetrator? I'm not decrying the fact that in our legal system and in our reality on the planet, that there are definitely people that are victims of crimes or abuse or whatnot, right? But if we want to disidentify with the story, because identification and grasping is one definition of suffering or an aspect of suffering, we need to see beyond that, to see that it is only perspective or perception, one's perception, that labels one as a victim and one as an oppressor or a perpetrator. So we still are subject to, in the daily living, taking action and participating in the story, in the apparent cause and effect, which Saturn is very much about karma and dharma, right? We are still participating in the story, but we are no longer identified with it as such. And what that does is we become dissolved, that fixation begins to dissolve. And what happens is that the suffering is lessened. And that's what I'm also very, very interested in here, is the lessening of suffering. That does not mean, and I don't want to sound religious here, I'm talking more from a mystical point of view.
Sure.
It's the lessening of suffering. That does not mean that pain is going to disappear on the planet. And then we can get into more about the Piscean aspect of compassion. And what does that mean in a time like this on the planet? So I'm going to pause here and see what comes up for you around any of this and your understanding of this time.
Yeah. We just said something about what as you're speaking, I'm thinking about how Eckhart Tolle has addressed this particular topic, and he talks about the ego being the little me. There's like little me that gets offended or feels slighted and all of this. And the mastery, the work there is to do is just like you were saying, step out of the identification with little me, and you have to develop space. And if there's ever, I'm getting chills right now, Erin, if there is ever a time in our lifetime right now, I mean, I remember when Saturn in the 60s, when Saturn was in Pisces, it was again in the mid 90s. And now here it is again, 27, 29 years, it comes back. But we are in a really dynamic place now to really step out of that identification and put space. And Pisces is all about space, right? So it's like, oh, guess what? Oh, I am not that. Like you're saying, I am not that, not this, not that. And to be able to say, I know that's going on, there's this world, and there's like right now there's a war in the Middle East and in Ukraine, and yet to not identify that we actually have choice, that we're not run by it. We stepping away from the machinery that is just status quo. This is just how it has to be, bop, 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 bop. And putting that space is everything. And it also, and it reminds me of when, okay, here's what's coming to me too. The movie The Matrix, the very end when I'm getting chills, when Neo gains his mastery, and when Agent Smith is trying to kill him, and he stands there, instead of the earlier in the movie, he's bending backwards to avoid bullets, but he's still in the Matrix because he's fighting and strategizing. But then he gets to that point when he's like, oh, here's a bullet. And he looks and the bullet stops. And he's like, oh, bullet, like I'm not reacting. I'm not bending backwards. I'm just being, like we were saying earlier, acceptance, love. Like he could just be with the bullet, whatever the bullet was going to do. He was just being with it. And in that space, the bullet just drops. And then Agent Smith is like, oh my God, I'm out of here. And he's like, it's like, there it is. Yeah, I just love it.
That is just a wonderful visual. I can see it so well. That is just a great scene and a great description. And this is a little bit about what I'm pointing to, of stepping out of the matrix. And it is one of those examples of both and. And I would say that it is almost like you're in it, but you're not in it. You're both subject to, and you are free from it. So there is no longer this resistance, you know? So one of the things, and you talked a little bit about stepping out of the story, and I feel like Saturn is giving us our homework here. That's why I wanted to talk with you on the Saturn direct, is that it's like, it's giving us, those who are willing and those who are paying attention, an imperative to say, this is your homework. You now get to understand what it's like to both step out of the story and be in story at the same time.
Powerful time.
Yes, exactly. And so I wrote something the other day, and I did send it to you. I wrote this with regard to responding to some of the horrific things that are going on with the war. And there was obviously, there's discussion on all sides, you know, who's to blame, what's the solution, and there's so much more separation going on, you know. And so what I wrote was, in order for the next true and good and right action to be known, one must first step out of the story. Call it non-attachment, awareness, awakeness, whatever it is labeled. It is the willingness to not identify with the drama that allows the clear light of next right action to shine, whether that's personal or as the collective. And since we are not separate, as we do one thing, we do all things, right? So it's perfectly fine to focus on the self, the small self, your own personal life of next right action that is affecting the collective. This so-called inner work, although I'm really hesitant to use the word inner work, because what is inner and what is outer, especially when we're talking about Pisces? What is the boundary, right? But we'll just call it inner work here. This so-called inner work is imperative. Otherwise, it will be more of the same, ongoing, this and that, war and peace, you and me. Step out of the story first, then allow, then participate, then act or not. And another thing that I wrote is, we are the very peace that is sought. We are the peace that is sought. That eternal equanimity, that eternal equilibrium, that sort of that lemon skate, that infinity symbol, right? Flowing like the ocean. Pisces, ocean, all is ocean. Everything is ocean. To expand our consciousness to realize that it is all one consciousness. And the suffering piece, and I know that this might be redundant for many of your listeners or my listeners, the suffering piece comes from the identification that this is going to be the solution or that is going to be the solution. And there is a Sanskrit term that I find really useful, which is neti neti. Not this, not this, not this, not this. So in the Piscean land, we, those of us who are awakening, we are willing. We are willing, and we know the truth of the willingness to live in the unknown, to truly live in mystery. And that goes beyond trust. You can say trust, you can say to hope if you want. You can say trust in the scaffolding of existence, or you could say God or source. But guess what? Pisces goes beyond that. Pisces is about faith. Pisces is absolute trust to the point of faith, because there is no separation between what is unfolding. It is an allowing of what is unfolding. And another thing we talked about before, you and I, is Pisces being this bridge between the transpersonal to the personal. And we were talking about direct knowing.
Right.
As opposed to sort of getting down to the facts, ma'am, you know, direct knowing. Well, it's a little tricky, because when I think of direct knowing, I think of Uranus, I think of pure intuition, just immediate insight, right? The higher octave of Mercury. What is the Piscean or the Neptune? It's not knowing, it's not unknowing. It's actually, I think there's actually a wonderful book that's an imbued teaching called The Cloud of Unknowing, The Great Cloud of Unknowing, which is another sort of metaphor for the divine. It's nothing to be known, actually. Because the known, and this is really sounds very esoteric and philosophical, but some of us will really appreciate it. To know something is in a way to be separate from it. There is an objectification of it. And there's nothing wrong with any of that.
Sure.
I'm just saying that there is also the reality of the unknowing and the absolute faith that it's happening exactly as it needs to happen.
And
including horror.
Including what?
Horrific things and
Horror,
tragedies.
Yeah, yeah.
This is also
all
super important right now. To be with, you're right, that's the true meaning of compassion. And to be with, meaning not turning away. That doesn't mean that we go and turn on our social media 24/7 and not turn away. But I mean, whatever reality is presenting to us, whether it's in the media or in our own homes or in our own bodies, whatever reality is presenting to us in that moment, we are not turning away. We are with. We see, we acknowledge. And I can feel some stickiness come in when I say that. Like, well, what does that mean to accept and to allow?
Because we don't like it. Like if you're sick, it's like, I don't like being sick.
Right. Right.
Somebody has cancer, it's like, well, who wants that? You know?
So what kind, maybe you can help me here to explain that. I mean, how would you handle that?
I know my teacher once said to us, a great master allows all things. So that's what came up when you
That's absolutely true. And I
it's easier said than done.
It's
wow.
It's easier said than done, so long as one is still identified. And the one of the definitions, another aspect of suffering, is the resistance to what is.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's the fixation on wanting it to be other.
Yes, I remember. I always held on to this for years. I heard this said many, many decades ago, but it was that suffering, I love this definition of suffering, is an inability to be with what's so. And so as soon as you're with it, not like you have to like it or agree with it, but it's like, oh yeah, there's this thing. And it's like that's the mechanism that, opens the door. You said something too when we were talking earlier. You said, I love this too, more on the same line, that suffering is usurping the mind of God. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. It's usurping. So were we to, I had something that happened to be yesterday, and I've still been in the back of my mind, I'm still kind of moping around it. And I'm like, no, I'm noticing the moping. And I'm like, no, you gotta get off it, let it go. Because who knows why I had a certain attachment to something happening. It's like, who the hell knows why that happened the way it did? And when you place your trust in the greater forces of everything, you're like, hey, there's nothing for me to worry about, and I don't have to suffer in pain of like that, this attachment to this thing that didn't happen. It's like, there's only one way out, and that is to drop that identification, because you're not going to go anywhere. You're not free until you drop it. So whether you like it or not, so you want out, great, drop it. It's like,
Right. I'm really glad that you brought that up. That is one of my favorite lines, is usurping the mind of God. And what I mean by that is, what I see is the lack of humility that arises in us as individual humans. And there's nothing, inherently evil or wrong around this. This is part of the human experience. Right. And so we don't want to get into a place of being judgmental around it. It's just a natural arising of being human, the fixation and the ego. this teaching and what I feel that Saturn and Pisces is offering us here is for those who really want it, who are called to go beyond, you know. So we don't want to judge. Everybody has every single molecule of existence, every single atom, every single speck of reality, of that universe, of that ocean of universes is absolutely necessary. That's another part of the Piscean soup, which
Yeah,
is ultimately, is there evil? Yes and no, because it is all the divine. It is all source,
right. Yeah.
right? It's evil is the part of consciousness that is ignorant to itself.
Ignorant to itself. Yeah.
Yes. And it's also part of the unfolding of the reality. Some of us have the capacity or have suffered so much that we're ready to be done with suffering. And those are the people that I'm very interested in speaking with.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not talking about coming out of pain. I'm talking about coming out of suffering.
Yeah.
So what I mean by the lack of humility, or what I like to say is someone who comes with hubris, is that feeling that they actually should know, they know what's best. They know what's right. They know the way that things should go down. They know that this should not happen. Who in the heck could possibly know?
Yeah. Who's doing that thinking? The ego.
Exactly.
Who's having that thought?
That's exactly right. Yes. So we stay in my languaging, prostrate, face down, face plant, total humility to reality, to existence, to what is unfolding. And then with that, what I say is almost a freedom and bondage, which is again a paradox of the Piscean two fish swimming in opposite directions. It's almost like a mudra, the movement there. So what I say by freedom and bondage is that one can be free in the allowing and the spontaneity of whatever is unfolding. And at the same time, we are subject to that unfolding. We are subject to experiencing it, and we are subject to the participation in it.
Wow.
And that gives great relief. That gives great relief.
This freedom.
Exactly. Yes, that's the whole point. It doesn't, awakening in the way that I define it, it doesn't give anybody necessarily any special powers or some sort of glamorous life or any of that. It doesn't do much at all. It only shifts that perspective entirely so that there is non-resistance. And that can make a huge difference, a huge relief. So one thing, perhaps I've said this with you before, Eckhart Tolle and millions of others, well, I don't know if there are millions of mystics and sages, but it's been said through the ages that suffering can be a gift. Why? Because it brings you to the point of total and complete surrender.
Right.
And what are we ultimately sacrificing? We are sacrificing the identification with the separate ego, which is what I feel is the truth of what the Christ, as the mystic, the Christ consciousness is all about. I and the Father are one. There is the realization that I am not separate.
Yeah, there is no separation. If anything, that's the great gift of Saturn, going stationing direct at 0 Pisces. It's a real huge cosmic highlighter pen, yellow highlighter pen. There is no separation.
Yes.
I feel, thinking about like the war in the Middle East right now, is interesting because I remember when the 6-Day War happened. I was a little kid. It was 1967, and I think maybe by then Saturn might have gone into Aries, if you really want to go. But I remember being, like just looking at that whole where people question the war, But now it's different. It's like now you see people who are going, now wait a minute, all right, this one took hostages and killed people. All right, but this one's striking back. And it's like they're both wrong, like there is no more. People are starting to see that whole narrative unraveling, like, oh, you have to take a side. If you're this, then you're that, or you're not that. And it's like, no, you don't put me in a box. I just, and I there's this desperate attempt, it seems, with the media. What I'm seeing in the media is to keep on putting people in factions in these boxes. And it's like, I don't agree. It's like, it's messy, but it's good that it's messy, because that's the dissolution. It has to be messy. You got to, the box is coming apart, and the emperor has no clothes, and it's like, oh, really?
That's right.
Now what do we do? Like you were saying the other day, what happens when there is no story? Saturn in Pisces. What happens when there's no story? It's like, oh my God. Wow. Not
That's
just
actually that's
there's no
another
story.
yes, no story. Stepping outside of the story is what I've been speaking about. And if not to get too esoteric, but what actually happens is time stops. Time stops, because you're not living in the past and you're not living in the present. And there is the realization that even memory or anticipation are happening right now. So there is the relaxation of the separate me, person, small self, as knowing it is the larger self, capital S. And there is no wavering from that. It's like the tip of a pen or the blade of a knife. It doesn't fall over to one side or the other. It is pure being, pure existence. Some people would say true nature.
I like that.
Yeah, so there is no story at that moment, because story implies this time thread.
Right. It's a function of time. Right.
Right.
And Saturn rules time.
Yes.
So Saturn
Wow.
Pisces is like time, no time. Linear, non-linear.
Yes. That's a wonderful way to look at it. And then in my personal experience, and what I would hope to share with your listeners, is that true nature, that non-resistant true nature, still participates in whatever it is inclined to participate in, without that suffering, without that grasping or resistance. So it's both and. Again, there is still the potential participation in the appearance of the story, which is sort of like a movie frame. It's happening in present time, like staccato, like there's one frame. And because it's all one, again, I don't want to this is for the real philosophy heads in the group.
Right.
Everything is appearing all at once. There's the full story. Okay. And you and I, and this is where the Bhagavad Gita comes in, we have our dharma or our karma to participate. We are uniquely programmed, or we uniquely have our combination of genes and conditioning, which is not separate from all that is, to play our role. That role might be a writer or an activist or a mother or a street person. We don't really know.
The divine Leela.
That's right. Exactly. The divine play. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And then one last little thing too, when we were talking about this long stretch of Saturn and Pisces, I mean, obviously he wants us to get this point.
Yeah.
I mean, he's going to show us this over the next couple of years. It's going to be quite interesting. I mean, the story is going to get, we don't know in what direction, but it's sort of like, I've said this before on my own podcast, this wound that's been lanced in a way so that we get to see all of it. Because in order for there to be actualization of freedom or true liberation from the personal to the collective, one must be willing to face everything, including death with a capital D, whatever that is. Can we be with that unwavering and be peace? We are peace. That is actual truth, reality. We are that peace that we are seeking.
And I would think too, with Saturn in Pisces, is like this, that which is termed to be death. Because what's that? That's a story too. Like what is,
Correct.
you know, I knew I had direct knowledge and experience of that when my mom passed away. It's like she didn't pass away. You know, I was like, I remember standing in the funeral home at her wake going, man, this is crazy. This is like, I was like almost laughing inside. And I know this is going to sound really weird. And I've never really shared this with anybody, but I'm going to share it on the podcast. She died of cancer. It was 90 days from her diagnosis to where she actually passed. So, of course, I was very close to my mother. It was very upsetting, of course, even though it, doing this work and da-da-da-da. And I did EFT tapping to get over the grief. And at one point I just had some breakthrough. Thank God, the EFT tapping with the neural pathways. And I was able to step away. That was the mechanism by which I was able to step away and see that the illusion of this passing and death and all, and to be at peace with it completely. I was completely present. I flew up to her hospice, completely present and totally okay with everything. And I was in this really like this state of, I don't know if you want to say bliss or samadhi, but I was just totally okay with everything and everyone, and my sister crying and my brother being whatever. And it was all fine. It was so liberating. I was able to get to this place before I got on the plane that I remember, I've never told this to anybody. I remember saying, I feel so liberated. I had this outfit picked out for the wake and the funeral, right? It was a beautiful white linen, it was white and it was beautiful. Like, you have to wear a nice, right? You're in front of your relatives and all that. But I was so liberated, Erin, that I had a pair of satin floral, bright, tropical fuchsia and red floral hot pants, satin hot pants. And I'm like, dude, I am going to wear these to my mother's funeral. And I know this totally sounds crazy. I am
Hot
so
pants, as in hot pants.
hot pants.
As in hot pants.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Short shorts.
I need to see a picture.
Oh, and I have to say, I didn't do it. I actually stepped back and I was like, okay, look, I know and then I had to sit with myself. I'm like, okay, just because I feel this way doesn't necessarily mean that I should do it. Or I'm like, it's okay. The fact that what mattered was that I was in that space. Now, maybe I was wrong about that. I don't know. But I know my conservative family would definitely have, my sister would not be who took care of her to the very end, lived up in the same area. I don't think they would appreciate that. But I'm like, okay, whatever. But I remember thinking I could play bongo drums. I could go up to her casket in the church and go bum, 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 with my hot pants. Like, I'm good with all this. Like, I am free. It was like, I'll never forget that.
I feel like you have really summed up liberation in that story. That pure acceptance of form to formlessness.
And if people needed
the joy and the release, the absolute joy.
And I could be with people not getting that or feeling sad. I'm like, yeah, it's sadness and crying is cool. Liberation is cool. All of it's cool.
Yes.
It was wild.
That's beautiful. I love that story.
Just, can you imagine it was a Catholic church. Imagine the priest, this woman in hot pants playing bongo drums on her mother's casket. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, that I did my tapping, man. I would tell you, yeah. So here's our Saturn and Pisces invitation. Go play bongo drums. You see, there is no death.
Correct. Right. Exactly.
You can see it intellectually. It's like, oh no, like in Catholic schools, like, oh, Jesus is resurrected and there's no death. It's like you heard it as your head your whole life, but it's like, no, I really got it. Like, I really got no death. Yeah. Wow. And then I've never been afraid after that. Like, I was never afraid to die. Like whenever it's my time, I'm like, I'm good. I'm good. I'm not afraid. I'm like, there's no
Mhm.
fear. So yeah. Anyway, there's a Saturn and Pisces story.
That's right.
On that one, but
And applying that same level of acceptance and seeing or awakeness to every single appearance in form. Applying exactly that. That's what we're talking about. That's what's possible here.
hot pants, Saturn and Pisces, 0 degree.
Absolutely. Hot pants.
Hot pants. Bongo
That's
drum
pretty
above a
much where we're
casket.
at. Mhm.
Casket as bongo drum. Hot
All
pants.
right. I'm right there with you. Bring on the rapture.
Bring it on. I love it. Wow, maybe we should end on that note. That feels
I think so. I don't think we can top it.
that's it.
We're gonna go topless.
What was that?
I said we'll just go topless. We won't even
Right.
talk.
Right. That would be the next step, right? Yeah. People have done that, you know, they reach enlightenment and they take all their clothes off and stand in public. I've heard, you know, stories like that. And actually, Saint Francis of Assisi did that when he went into this samadhi, and it was in medieval Italy in whatever, he was a wealthy family, and he just took all his clothes off and he stood in the town square and he's like, I'm free, man. And they're like, okay. He got it.
It is a place and a space of pure spontaneity, which is another thing that we're talking about here, is this timelessness.
Free of time. Yeah. No past, no future.
Exactly.
Just
That's what
now.
Saturn and Pisces is offering us. And when there is no time, there is only spontaneous living. And my experience, and I'm sure yours as well as others, for myself, there is no filter. So that does increase sensitivity in a lot of ways. Also, you never know what's going to come out of your mouth, or
Right.
what clothes might come off.
Right. Or put on or
Right, right.
Yeah.
So I would just like to invite folks to explore what we've talked about here today for themselves, and see if it offers some relief. And it is not a spiritual bypass, because, as I said, we are still subject to living in the appearance of reality, in the phenomena that are occurring, with the understanding that one is not separate, and one cannot be a separate doer, that there is not a separate volition going on. It is all one functioning. So relax, enjoy your hot pants.
I love it. All right. Wow. Thank you. This has been a great chat. I really appreciate having this opportunity with you. Always delightful. So guys, for those of you, again, her email, her Substack, Erin's Substack is Erin Reese, REESE.substack.com, and her website, erinreese.com. And the email is satsang, which is a Sanskrit, SATSANG, satsang at erinreese.com. And the non-dual teachings, monthly Zoom calls. You can continue this conversation. Hot pants lessons in hot pants we got you.
All right, I'll bring the bongo drums.
All right, yay.
Thank you so much, Juliana. It's such a joy and an honor and a pleasure to be with you. And I so appreciate the work that you are sharing with us, and your beautiful, beautiful heart. Thank you.
Oh, yay. You're welcome. I love you, Erin. You're awesome. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you next time. This is Irliana Samsara and Erin Reese, and we will see you soon. Many, many blessings. Namaste.
Namaste.